today, you will discover that not every clown is meant to bring joy. Some hide secrets so dark that not even the circus lights will reveal them. Get ready, because the show is just beginning. It was an ordinary night in a quiet little town, kind of place where everyone knows each other, and the routine is rarely interrupted by anything out of the ordinary. That week, something different was in the air. The colorful posters scattered throughout the streets announced the arrival of the circus, bringing with it the promise of laughter, magic, and fun for the whole family. Children ran excitedly, pulling their parents toward the large, empty lot that, in just a few hours, would be transformed into a world of fantasy. When the circus finally arrived, bringing with it a caravan of colors and sounds, everyone was eager for the show. The smell of sweet popcorn, the bright blinking lights, and the lively music created an atmosphere of pure euphoria. And it was there, amidst all this excitement, that one particular figure caught everyone's attention. A clown dressed in vibrant clothes with a smile far too wide to be comfortable. He danced around the ring, his movements agile, almost hypnotic. The children followed him with wide eyes, enchanted by his tricks and juggling. But for the adults, there was something strange about that clown. A subtle discomfort itched in the back of their mind, a sense that something was off. But who would think twice about a clown? After all, they are there to entertain, to bring laughter. However, when the show ended and the circus began to pack up, the children couldn't stop talking about him. The wide smile clown, as they began to call him. He was their new hero, the imaginary friend everyone adored. But as the children slept peacefully, dreaming of the clown's tricks, the parents began to feel uneasy, as if a shadow had settled in their thoughts. Something was coming, something no one in that little town could have predicted. And you? Have you ever felt that a smile could hide something darker? The children in the little town wouldn't stop talking about the clown. In the days following the show, he seemed to be everywhere. In the mornings, some children saw him strolling through the square, performing magic tricks for anyone who wanted to watch. In the afternoons, he appeared on street corners, handing out small balloons and colorful candies, always with that wide, unsettling smile, as if he were guarding a secret no one else could uncover. He was friendly, approachable, like a friend children could hardly believe they had found. The parents watched from a distance, some with a timid smile, others with a tinge of worry they couldn't quite explain. After all, what was wrong with a clown who seemed to love children so much? He never asked for anything in return. The joy of the little ones seemed to be enough for him. But there was something in the way he looked at the children, as if he saw more than just friends, as if he were choosing. The adults began to notice that the children talked about the clown with an almost obsessive tone. They wanted to see him all the time, to be with him, play with him. And he was always around, always appearing at the moments when he was least expected, as if he knew exactly where and when he would be most desired. He entered the lives of these families with the same ease that a cold wind slips through a half-open window, unnoticed until it's too late. And then, something even stranger started to happen. The children began to ask questions they had never asked before. "Mommy, what would you do if Daddy wasn't here anymore? Daddy, would you let me if I asked the clown to live with us?" They were innocent questions, but loaded with a curiosity that seemed to have deeper roots. And the parents, not understanding where these ideas were coming from, tried to brush them off with nervous laughter, trying to maintain normalcy. But normalcy was beginning to unravel, like an old paper that crumbles at the touch. There was something in the children's eyes that hadn't been there before, something that reflected the shadow of that wide, disturbing smile. And the clown kept appearing, kept smiling, as if he were just waiting for the right moment. It was on a quiet afternoon, when most of the children were at school and the streets were nearly deserted, that one of the parents, practical man of few words, decided to investigate the circus more closely. Something about that clown bothered him deeply, something he couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the way his child talked about him, with an almost religious fervor. Or maybe it was the way the clown seemed to appear out of nowhere, as if he knew every corner of the town. When he arrived at the circus grounds, Now almost empty, he noticed something strange. The large, colorful tent was still standing. The place was deserted, no signs of life. Only the heavy, oppressive silence filled the space. The man had never been superstitious, but there was something in that stillness that made his skin crawl. He walked slowly, observing every detail, looking for any sign that might give him a clue about what was happening. Then he noticed a small door at the back of one of the circus wagons. A door that, under any other circumstance, would have gone unnoticed. But there, at that moment, it seemed to pulse with its own energy, inviting him to open it. Without thinking twice, he turned the knob. The door creaked open. What he found inside was disturbing. A small makeshift room, dimly lit by a weak hanging lamp, revealed a scene that seemed to have come out of a nightmare. Broken porcelain dolls, all dressed like clowns, were scattered across the floor in strange poses, as if they had been abandoned in the middle of a macabre game. And then, in a corner, he saw something that made his heart race. Photographs of children. Children from the town, all smiling beside the clown, their faces happy and carefree. But something was wrong with the photos. In some, the children's eyes seemed to have been drawn on, as if someone had erased their faces and replaced them with distorted expressions. And among the photos, one figure recurred. Clown. Always present, always smiling, with an intensity that made his stomach churn. Then he heard a sound behind him. The man's heart nearly stopped as he slowly turned around. There, in the doorway, stood the clown, smile wider than ever, eyes gleaming with an excitement that should not have been there. The man froze, his mind racing in all directions. None offered an escape. This was the moment when the truth began to reveal its darkest face. The man felt panic seize his body, every fiber begging him to run, but his legs seemed glued to the floor. Clown took a step forward, the sound of his shoes echoing in the small room like a sinister drumbeat. The smile, that wide and insane smile, seemed to stretch even further, as if the very flesh of his face were being pulled unnaturally. "Hello, friend. Need something?" The clown's voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a note of malice that sent waves of terror down the man's. He tried to speak, but the words refused to come out. All he could do was stare into those penetrating eyes, which now seemed to burn with a contained hunger. The clown slowly approached, each step accompanied by a deadly silence, as if the entire world were holding its breath. The man finally managed to move, stepping back, but his feet stumbled over the dolls scattered on the floor, causing him to lose his balance. His hands grabbing at the dirty ground. The clown came even closer, now standing over him, a shadow swallowing all the light around. There was nowhere to run, no escape, only the muffled sound of his own breathing and the soft, almost childlike laughter that escaped the clown's lip. "There's no need to be afraid." Crouching beside him, so close that the man could smell the sickly sweet scent of bubblegum mixed with something more metallic. "Just what?" The man tried to get up, but it was too late. Clown reached out, his long, thin fingers painted white, gripping the man with unexpected force. Pressure was overwhelming, as if an inhuman strength were being applied with a touch that should have been light. And then the clown whispered something in the man's ear. Words that should never have been heard, secrets that should never have been told. What exactly was whispered? No one will ever know, because the last thing anyone in that little town heard was the laughter. Laughter that started softly but soon turned into a grotesque, distorted sound that seemed to come from a nightmare. At that moment, the man knew there was no escape. Clown's macabre game was just beginning, and he was only the first pawn in a game no one had asked to play. Clown let the man go. That was not the time or place for his atrocity. The man, frightened and disoriented, decided to go to the town's police, but they had already been swept up by the circus's charming magic, didn't believe the man's story, and said they would investigate only to get rid of him quickly as possible. Town was immersed in a strange calm. The children, who once ran happily through the streets, now seemed always to be looking for something or someone. Their smiles, once innocent, now carried a hint of mystery, as if they knew something the adults didn't. While the children talked about the clown with an eerie familiarity, Parents began to feel the weight of a fear they couldn't explain. After leaving the police station, the man entered an alley, perhaps to take a shortcut home. His last trace of life was recorded by a security camera at the police station. No one ever saw the man who went to investigate the circus again. He disappeared as suddenly as the shadows that seemed to stretch at the corners as night fell. His absence left a void that no one could fill. Without a trace, without a sign, disappeared like a magic trick. And that's when the clown began to make his boldest move. Some children began receiving invitations. Small pieces of colored paper, handed directly into their hands, always accompanied by a smile. "Bring your parents for a special show," the invitation read, followed by a child's drawing of a smiling clown. The invitation seemed harmless, even charming, but there was something disturbing in the simplicity of that request. The insistent request of the children, who now almost begged for them to go to the circus one more time, was unanimous in every house that had received that special invitation. After all, what could go wrong? It was just a circus, a place of fun, lights, and laughter. Nothing more. They wanted to believe that, even if their instincts screamed otherwise. And so at the end of that week, the families began to head to the grounds where the circus was set up. But something was different this time. The grounds seemed darker. The lights didn't twinkle with the same cheerful brightness, and the distant sound of laughter seemed fake. The children, however, didn't seem to notice. Their eyes were fixed on the clown, who waited at the entrance with arms open as if about to give a big hug. "Welcome to the final show," he announced in a voice full of enthusiasm, but which sounded like distant thunder in the minds of the adults. And it was at that moment, when the parents took the first step toward the ring, that a chill ran down their spines. The air seemed heavier, the night darker, and the clown smile was as if time had stopped for a moment, freezing everyone in a growing sense of dread. The invitation had been accepted, and the show was about to begin. But the fun awaiting them was not what they expected. And the children, with their eyes shining with excitement, firmly held their parents' hands, guiding them into the circus, the center of a nightmare that was about to unfold. If this story is already captivating you, and you want more terrifying tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel right now. Click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you don't miss any of our upcoming dark stories. The scariest parts are yet to come, and you won't want to miss out. The ring was set, the lights focused on the center, creating a perfect circle of clarity amid the darkness that seemed to grow around it. Families settled into the stands, the children eager, their eyes shining with anticipation, while the parents exchanged wary glances. Something was wrong with that place, an invisible tension that tightened the air, making each breath more difficult. The clown was at the center of the ring, turning slowly, his eyes scanning the audience like a predator observing its prey. The wide smile was fixed on his face, but this time there was something different about it. A gleam in his eyes, an energy that seemed to pulse around him, making his presence even more oppressive. He was no longer trying to entertain. He was revealing his true show. The circus lights began to flicker, as if the electricity were struggling to stay on. The music, once lively, was now a distorted whisper, a melody that seemed to come from another world. The children, however, seemed enchanted, unable to perceive the danger approaching. They were fixated on the clown, like puppets tied to invisible strings, dancing to the command of their master. And then, he began. With a theatrical gesture, the clown pulled a red handkerchief from his pocket and made it disappear with a quick motion. The children applauded, laughing, but the parents remained motionless, their eyes fixed on that unsettling figure. The red handkerchief was followed by a series of simple tricks, each stranger than the last. A rabbit that leaped out of a hat, only to disappear into a cloud of black smoke. A bouquet of flowers that turned to ashes in a matter of seconds. But no one was prepared for the final trick. The clown raised his hands, asking for silence. The music stopped. The air became heavy as lead. He leaned forward as if about to share a dark secret, and then, in a low and somber voice, said, "And now, for the final trick. I need volunteers." The words resonated like a funeral bell, and before the parents could react, Children, with glazed eyes and enigmatic smiles, stood up. They began walking toward the ring, one by one, without hesitation, without fear. And the parents, as if paralyzed by an invisible force, remained in their places, unable to move, speak, prevent what was happening. When the last child entered the circle of light, the clown raised his hands again. An absolute silence fell over the circuit. And then, the quick and precise movement, he lowered his hand. The ring lights exploded in a blinding flash, and the scream that echoed in the darkness was so visceral, so full of pure terror, that it tore through the night, leaving an indelible mark on the souls of all who heard it. But when the lights went out and darkness took over, there was nothing left. No clown, no children, no trace of a trick. Only emptiness and the terrifying certainty that this was no ordinary circus. The show was over, but the nightmare was just beginning. The silence that followed that flash was deafening, a void that seemed to suck all sound, all life from the environment. The stands, once full of worried parents, were now a sea of pale faces, frozen in a state of absolute terror. The children had disappeared, taken somewhere beyond what the mind could comprehend, and the parents, trapped in a nightmare they didn't understand, tried desperately to process what had happened. But the clown was still there. At the center of the ring, emerging from the darkness like a living shadow, his smile now distorted into something monstrous, something that should never have existed. His eyes, once merely unsettling, now burned with a primal hunger, an insatiable desire that could be felt in every heartbeat of the survivors. Without warning, the clown began to move again, but this time there were no tricks, no illusions. He walked among the benches, his footsteps echoing in the void, while the parents, finally freed from the stupor that had kept them paralyzed, tried to stand up, tried to run. But it was useless. There was nowhere to flee, no escape from that nightmare. The clown's laughter, once mere echoes of a dark amusement, now resounded with an intensity that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. He was getting closer, choosing his next volunteers, with an almost palpable pleasure, his eyes fixed on the terrified parents, who knew deep down that there would be no escape. And then, one of the parents did the unthinkable. In a last act of desperation, he ran to the center of the ring, shouting his child's name, hoping that, somehow, he could bring them back. But what he found there was not the answer he was looking for. In the center of the ring, where the children had disappeared, was something that made his blood run cold. A large box, covered with a red cloth, so familiar and yet so terrifying in its context. The clown was right behind him, watching with that malicious smile, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The man hesitated, his mind battling between hope and fear. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, won out. He pulled the cloth with a quick motion, revealing the box's contents. And there at the bottom, he felt the presence of purest evil, something that devoured his soul before he could even scream. His eyes widened, his mouth opened in a silent scream, while the clown laughed, a laughter that reverberated in the darkness, growing louder, growing more insane. The show, it seemed, was nowhere near its end. The circus had claimed its victims, but the show had to go on. And the clown, now revealed in his true form, was just beginning his most wicked game. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if the very environment were conspiring to trap everyone in that endless nightmare. The clown's laughter continued to echo through the empty stands, distorting into something that was not just a sound but a sensation, a presence that enveloped each remaining spectator, dragging them into the abyss of despair. The few who still had strength tried to flee, but the circus seemed to have transformed into a labyrinth with no exit. The red velvet curtains, once inviting, now hung like bloody claws, blocking every attempt to escape. The lights flickered chaotically, casting grotesque shadows on the walls, figures that seemed to take on a life of their own, twisting in a macabre dance. The center of the ring, bound stood, now a monstrous figure, far beyond what any mind could conceive. His form had changed, his face a grotesque mask of hunger and malice, his body elongated in inhuman proportions. He was no longer a mere performer, but a living embodiment of the nightmare, something that fed on the fear and suffering of those around him. With a slow and deliberate gesture, he raised his hands, and the lights went out all at once, plunging everything into total darkness. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the labored breathing of those still alive, desperately trying to orient themselves in that oppressive void. And then, one by one, the children returned to the stands where their parents were, each with a porcelain doll or an antique toy, as if marked. They were happy, smiling, hypnotized. Their parents hugged them fervently, a mixture of relief, fear, and guilt for having gone to that circus. The parents took their children by the arm and tried to leave that scene of psychological terror immediately, but the children were hypnotized. Some gradually managed to run away from the circus, but when they got home, they locked the doors and hid as if something terrible was lurking. But the terror was already inside their homes. Others managed to throw away the toys the clown had given their children. But when they got home, the toys were still there, untouched. And terror took over the homes of all the families that had been invited to the final show. Days passed, families broken by terror, and the children hypnotized and happy. This was the new scenario of the once peaceful town. The selected children were now different. They wouldn't let go of their toys for anything, and kept repeating to their peers that they had been chosen because they were special. The terrified parents went to the police to give statements but had no evidence of any crime. Over the weeks, screams were heard. First, distant, like echoes of incomprehensible pain, and then closer, more intense, until they merged into a single cry of agony, pierced the darkness. The survivors felt the ground tremble beneath their feet, as if the very earth was about to collapse, swallowing them one by one into an abyss with no end. In every house, it was the same. Before anyone could react, the lights turned on, and the children were there, arranged around the bodies of their parents, their faces pale, eyes empty like broken dolls. "Now," the children said, in a voice dripping with pure venom, "for the grand finale, dinner is served," followed by distorted laughter of pure horror. Darkness swallowed everything once more. The circus had gone as if it had never existed, leaving behind only the silence of the night, the distant sound of the wind, and children completely disturbed by the feeling that something horrible had been left behind, something that waited patiently in the darkness for the next show. These scenes of horror were coincidentally repeated in every house that had received the invitation. Parents still alive tried to escape. Others went to psychiatric hospitals to admit their children, and one or two more bold and terrified families abandoned their children in an attempt to flee the tragic fate that had already been set. But all, without exception, experienced a similar end. Somehow, sooner or later, the children, or what was left of them, managed to complete their macabre mission. If you've made it this far, it's because, like us, you feel that irresistible attraction to mystery, the unknown, and the terror lurking in the shadows. This was just a glimpse of what our dark tales have to offer. If stories that make your heart race and your mind wander down dark paths are what you're looking for, then you're in the right place. Here, each narrative is an invitation to explore the darkest side of imagination, to dive into nightmares that cannot be forgotten. And believe me, what's coming is even more disturbing. But don't waste any time. Subscribe now and join us on this journey into the unknown. Turn on the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming terrifying tales. We're just getting started, and fear is our true spectacle. The last child left a note written in their parents' blood. I don't need vices to be brilliant. I don't need to be brilliant to be human, but I need your smile to satisfy me, and I will take it from you, slowly. Maybe that's what the clown told the first brave man who investigated him. What do you think?